It is so good to see everybody today, and it's so good to have Ken. Um, I've been told not to reveal too much because there are twists along the way in Ken's story. So at this point, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say in terms of Ken's introduction. He is a remarkable individual with a tremendous story of resilience. After being paralyzed while playing football in 1970. I'm going to stop right there because you guys know that happened, and I don't know what else I'm allowed to reveal or not, so I'm going to stop right there. But I thought Ken's story of resilience was one that we all need to hear nowadays, because if anything last week tells us we need to find resilience wherever we can. Just a few shameless plugs while I have you here. If you haven't voted yet for the World Zionist Congress elections, you can see Ann. If you haven't downloaded our new Anshe Mammoth app, you can do it right from the app, as well as register for dinners and things like that, or Bennett's Lunch and Learn on Wednesday, or any number of things. So make sure you download the app if you haven't done so yet. You can even get the bulletin right on it too. Anyway, without further ado, it's a pleasure to welcome Ken to our community, and thank you to Jay and Betty for bringing him to our attention. Ken?
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for everyone who's come today. So I've been asked to share a bit about my life story, and it seems like the best place for me to start would be to take you back to 1970, because at that time I was a fairly typical 20-year-old college student at Cornell University. This is a picture of me on the right, back then in October of 1970. And like most 20-year-olds, I worked hard in school, and I loved sports. I was a member of a fraternity, and I had a lot of good friends. And like many 20-year-olds, I dreamed of leading a useful, productive, rewarding, and happy life. And I remember on the night of October 30th, 1970, I was attempting to cook dinner on a gas stove for some of my football teammates. But when the pilot light was lit, gas that had been building up inside of the stove suddenly exploded. And there was a bright flash of light coupled with a thunderous boom, and I instinctively looked down to see if I was hurt. And incredibly, I was not injured. I was not burned. I was not even singed. And I remember lying in bed that night thinking about how lucky I was. I remember thinking, as I guess 20-year-olds are apt to think, if I can survive an explosion like that without being injured, I can survive anything. Nothing can happen to me. I must be invincible. The next day, I broke my neck. I was injured making a tackle on a kickoff in a lightweight football game against Columbia University. In fact, this slide now is the actual play that I got hurt on. I'm here on the bottom right of the screen, and this is the play that I was injured on. So I was injured making a tackle on a kickoff in this game against Columbia. And in an instant, I went from being in the very best shape of my life and with a very promising future to being paralyzed from the shoulders down and totally dependent on those around me. So I spent the next 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers. And initially, my very survival was very much in question. I later learned that when my family consulted with a specialist about my condition, he told them that I probably wouldn't survive the week. And the doctor said that if I were to survive, my life expectancy would be between 5 and 9 years. He said that I would have no movement, I would not be able to do anything, and I'd probably end up living that amount of time in a nursing home. And the doctor actually said to my family, if he were my son, I would just let him go. My family was too stunned to even reply. So it was months before I could even sit up in a wheelchair without passing out. I still get dizzy during parts of every day. But the spinal cord injuries affected virtually every part of my life. Initially, I couldn't move at all. It took quite a while before I could move my left arm a bit, but not my fingers or my wrist, so I could just move my arm a little. And on the right side of my body, I could just shrug my shoulder a bit. So I need help doing virtually everything. I cannot roll over in bed, or dress myself, or wipe my nose, or scratch an itch, or do so many common daily activities that most people take for granted. But one of the things that surprised me is that while I injured my neck and not my head, many people started treating me as if I had an intellectual disability as well. People used to come into my room, including the doctors and the nurses, turn to the person next to me and ask them questions about me as if I couldn't talk myself, as if I wasn't even in the room. And there were so many scary thoughts racing through my mind at this time. I mean, I was terribly depressed, and nobody was really telling me what my condition was and what I could expect for the future. And one of my concerns was that what's going to happen to my employment prospects? I mean, at the time of my injury, I was 20 years old, studying industrial engineering at one of the finest engineering colleges in the country. And now I wasn't sure what I was going to be able to do. And I was very upset to learn that it seemed the medical personnel thought the best that I would ever be able to do would be to someday sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. And I was devastated. Now at that time, I couldn't even dial a telephone, which there were rotary phones then, not even touch tone phones. So I couldn't even dial a telephone, take notes, or write anything. And I started to think, dialing a telephone and selling magazine subscriptions may even be too difficult for me to do. Excuse me, I'm just gonna drink it. So I worked hard during my rehabilitation. And as I indicated, it was months before I could even sit up in a wheelchair without passing out. I was listed in critical condition for a few weeks before I began to stabilize. And I worked hard during my rehabilitation to try and learn some simple tasks, such as using braces and splints to turn the pages of a book. And you'll see in this picture, my arm is supported by a brace because I couldn't even hold it up without being supported. And in this next slide, I was learning how to type on an IBM Selectric typewriter. And I was typing with this long stick that had a rubber tip at the end that I could hit one key at a time, very slowly. Unfortunately, they did not have laptop computers back then. So this was the most advanced technology that I was working with. So with my splints, I could turn pages of a book, although it might take me a few minutes sometimes just to turn a page. Type on the typewriter, operate an electric wheelchair with my left arm, and even dialing the telephone I learned how to do. So I knew that as a result of my physical limitations, in order for me to have any chance of being successful in life, I needed to make the most of my mental abilities. I knew I needed to go back to school and get the best education possible. So just 11 days after I was finally discharged from the hospital, I traveled 250 miles away from my home and family, and with the aid of a personal care attendant that I had met just once before, I returned to the Cornell campus in upstate Ithaca, New York, and I resumed my studies in industrial engineering. And very shortly after I returned to Cornell, I was approached by a fellow student who asked me if I was Ken Kunken. And when I responded that I was, he asked, "Aren't you supposed to be in the hospital?" Now, I was very tempted to reply yes, but I escaped. Please don't tell anyone. But I thought better of it. But I knew that many quadriplegics, and I'm considered a quadriplegic, meaning paralyzed in all four limbs. I knew that many quadriplegics did remain in hospitals, or rehabilitation facilities, or nursing homes, or at homes with their families. And I believed that what enabled me to return to school, while others remained in institutions, was my attitude and my vision. And I also have to give a lot of credit to my very supportive family and friends, because without their help, there was nothing I would have been able to accomplish without their support, caring, and physical assistance. So when I went back to Cornell, this was now in 1971, approximately 20 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect, which that act, of course, helped make facilities more wheelchair accessible, as well as more accessible for people with other types of disabilities. And Cornell in 1971 was particularly inaccessible. Excuse me, please, can I drink? Cornell is on a very hilly terrain, and virtually every one of its buildings has steps in front of it. And there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus. One of the classes that I took, which met 3 times a week, was located in a building that had 16 steps in front of it. You can go to the next slide. And this is that building now, Bailey Hall, that I class in 3 times a week. And of course, I couldn't even use my electric wheelchair to get around in Cornell. So this is what I had to do 3 times a week. And once I got into the building, in order not to block other students and be out of the way, I had to sit behind the last row, way off to the side, where I could barely even see the professor. My dorm room was located in a building that had 10 steps to get in. On my first day of classes, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps just to attend my first day. So that's what it was like. And I remember coming back to my dorm room, having my attendant lie me in bed, and I just sat there staring at the ceiling, thinking, what was I thinking? Going back to Cornell. And so soon after my injury, I'd only recently got out of the hospital. And I was lying there thinking, I must be crazy to be doing what I was doing. And I was also thinking, what else am I gonna do? I didn't have a plan B. So I knew I had to make the best of the situation. I had to make it work. So through hard work, determination, perseverance, and a lot of help from my personal care attendants and my fellow classmates, I was able to complete my junior and senior year at Cornell during those next 2 years. And on May 25th, 1973, I graduated with my degree in industrial engineering. And I was very surprised when I graduated that I received national publicity. Apparently in 1973, it was news when a quadriplegic could leave a hospital setting, actually return to school, function in the outside world, and actually graduate. Here, this article, it says 3,212 graduates got their degrees that day. I was the only graduate that needed to use a wheelchair. fact, just to give you an example about how unusual it was back then, and unfortunately I can no longer find the article, but there was actually an article about me in the National Enquirer. The Enquirer thought it was so unusual, they did a story. Well, following my graduation, I knew industrial engineering really wasn't a viable field for me. I mean, as I mentioned, they didn't have laptop computers back then, and it was really difficult for me to function as an engineer. And I knew that what I really wanted to do was to devote my life and my career to helping others, particularly people with disabilities or people who were dealing with life-altering diseases. I wanted to be able to provide them with better help, care, and support than I felt were available to me when I was undergoing my rehabilitation. So I changed my career goal, and through the recommendation of a psychology professor at Cornell, Dr. James Moss, he encouraged me to pursue a career in counseling. So I stayed at Cornell and pursued and earned my Master of Arts degree, where I majored in counseling and student personnel administration. And I became the first quadriplegic to ever earn a graduate degree from Cornell. And then to increase my counseling credentials, I went to Columbia University, where I earned my second master's degree. This degree was a Master of Education degree, where I majored in psychological counseling and rehabilitation. And I decided to look for a job in the rehabilitation counseling field. And I suppose I was fairly confident now that I had 2 degrees from Cornell, 1 from Columbia, 3 prestigious Ivy League schools, 2 master's degrees, that I shouldn't have too much difficulty securing employment. Well, no one would hire me. I sent out more than 200 resumes and looked for a job for a year. It seemed in 1974, 1975, everyone felt that I was just too disabled to work. In fact, I was even turned down when I offered to volunteer my services. I couldn't even volunteer and give my services away. But I knew that I could work and make a significant contribution, and I was determined to continue my job search until I secured employment. And finally, in 1977, I found one organization willing to give me the opportunity to show what I could do. And that organization was Abilities Incorporated, which was located on Long Island. It was part of what was then called the Human Resources Center, and is now called the Viscardi Center, after its founder, Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr. And they hired me to work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for other individuals who had disabilities. And I was thrilled to have that job. You know, having that job increased my feelings of self-worth, my self-esteem, my self-confidence, and it really changed my perspective on what things were like for me now in the work world, dealing with other individuals. And for the first time since my injury, I was in a position where I could help others. Now, apparently, my work at the center attracted some attention. In fact, NBC News decided to do a human interest story. And on October 20th, 1977, Melba Tolliver from NBC News came and interviewed me to do a short 5-minute human interest segment. And the story was shown 4 days later on October 24th. Now remember, this was 47 years ago. And at that time, one of my friends said that there was a new video recording device. Not many people had it back then. The Center did, where they could actually record off the television. I had never heard or seen of it before, but maybe some of you heard about it. It's called a VCR, and my friend taped it. So if I can do it, we'll try and show you that now.
Well, Chuck, Ken Kunken had planned to become an industrial engineer or a lawyer when he entered Cornell University in 1968. But in his junior year, Ken's life and his career plans underwent a dramatic change. 7 years ago, in a football game between Cornell and Columbia, Ken suffered a spinal cord injury. It left him a quadriplegic. Both his legs and arms are paralyzed, except for some movement in one hand. Last May, Ken, who is 27, was hired by the Human Resources Center in Albertson, Long Island, to direct its project for disabled college students. Ken is almost totally self-sufficient at the modified workspace which he designed himself. A special pen holder, like the on and off switch for his telephone, and a splint that he uses to dial with, were designed by engineers at the center.
If a work site can be changed just slightly to accommodate the needs of a handicapped individual, then you're removing a barrier to that person's independence and increasing his potential to function. Most of the adaptations that are necessary are very inexpensive and very easy to make.
Physical barriers often fall before attitudinal ones, Ken says, but the center's work is aimed at breaking down both. It conducts research and development programs for the handicapped, operates a school for 230 severely disabled children, and a work facility which employs over 200 disabled adults. Ken believes his own personal experience and training well qualify him to be a counselor to disabled college students. 10 months after his football injury, he was out of the hospital and back in the classroom at Cornell. By 1973, he had earned an engineering degree, but his career interests were going in a new direction. He spent 3 more years getting 2 graduate degrees in counseling and student personnel administration. Then he started job hunting. Ken estimates that over a 10-month stretch, he sent out 200 job resumes. The results were dismal, and he understands the fears a disabled person will have in simply applying for a job.
Now you're applying for a job in the paralyzed.
all been there with technology.
Well, Chuck, Ken Kunken had planned to become the person will have in simply applying for a job.
Now, you're applying for a job in the paralegal profession. Before they can work on a job, they need to apply for a job, and that's been a very difficult process for many people. How do you present your disability to an employer to show them that you can do the work? You don't want to tell a person that you have a disability and all of a sudden immediately be rejected as a job applicant.
Before his accident, Ken says, he never thought about what it was like to be disabled and hardly knew the meaning of the word paraplegic.
It's quite a difficult adjustment to make, to suddenly lose, all movement, and as a result, have to become quite a bit dependent on others around me. When I knew, what the extent of my injury was and the prognosis for the future, the thing that would remain foremost in my mind is how to make the best of it, how to make the most of the situation, and to do as much as with my life as was possible.
Now, I don't want to leave you with the impression that Ken Kunken's life is all work, because it's not. He told me that he still participates in many of the same activities that he did before his accident. But as far as sports is concerned, he's more a spectator than a participant. Chuck?
Thank you, Bubba. I'll see you later.
Now,
Well, Chuck,
that same week, unrelated to that news story, I was actually honored by the Long Island Rehabilitation Association, where I was named the Long Island Rehabilitation Association's Rehabilitant of the Year. And I received this award before approximately 250 rehabilitation personnel on Long Island. And when I got that award, it was basically pretty bittersweet for me, because I received a standing ovation from many of the same rehab personnel who just a few months earlier were too afraid, or at least too hesitant, to give me the opportunity to show what I could do, to hire me. And I just have to comment that sometimes you need to have the self-confidence to take the initiative and not wait for somebody else to make the first move, to hire somebody with a disability. And particularly people in the rehab profession who encourage people with disabilities to go out and get a job, were hesitant themselves to hire me with 3 Ivy League degrees, 2 master's degrees. They weren't ready to do it. Well, in any event, my duties at the center, kept expanding and increasing. And in addition to my counseling duties, I served the center as one of their consultants on affirmative action and non-discrimination concerning people with disabilities. And I frequently spoke at conferences and before groups and organizations on the topics. And often after my talks, I would be asked questions. And while I would certainly do my best to respond appropriately, I was always very careful to caution the questioners they should really consult with a lawyer about their concerns. And I guess it didn't take long before I started to think, there's no reason why I couldn't become that lawyer. So in the fall of 1979, I decided to tackle a new challenge, and I left the center and went to Hofstra University School of Law. Now, there were a number of people that questioned my decision to leave such a good, comfortable position at Abilities Incorporated, where the whole facility was wheelchair accessible, and everybody was attuned to the needs of people with disabilities, to pursue a difficult, uncertain career in law. But there was more that I wanted to accomplish, and I didn't want to settle for anything less. And despite the fact that it took me so long to get that job, I decided to leave to go to law school. When I finally did leave the center, they not only hired a full-time counselor to replace me, but they had to divide additional duties that I was doing between 2 other employees. And I suppose I made a lasting impression on some of the people at the center, because 30 years after I left, the president of Abilities Incorporated called me on the telephone and asked me to be a member of their board of directors, which I very proudly accepted. And beginning in 2009, I was serving on the board of directors for Abilities Incorporated. And beginning in 2017, I started serving on the board of directors of Abilities Parent Corporation, the Viscardi Center. And the reason why I'm showing you this slide now is at the time I was asked to be on the board, the person on the right of the slide, John Kemp, was the CEO and president of Abilities, and he's since left and is now the head of the Lakeshore Foundation in Alabama because he wanted to be closer to his wife's family. But you can notice this picture, John has hooks for arms. He was born without arms and legs, walked on artificial legs, also became a lawyer, an incredibly impressive person who's now the head of the Lakeshore Foundation in Alabama. The other person in the slide, though, is my cousin Roy Davis. And one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this is my family has been so helpful to me in every step of the way since my injury. And they've taken such an interest in me and what I was doing and helping people with disabilities that my cousin Roy became so actively involved. He's now chairman of the board of directors at the Viscardi Center. So I'm so proud to be on their board of directors and to be able to stay involved with helping people with disabilities. Now, while I was in law school, certainly it was challenging and a lot of work. And after my second year of law school, during the summer, I did an internship at the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. And not only did I enjoy the experience, but I found a new way that I could help people and serve the community as a whole. And I knew that I wanted to devote my life and my career to public service. And working at the District Attorney's Office seemed like the perfect place for me to do it. So this is a picture of me with the District Attorney at the time, Dennis Dillon. This was during my internship. So at the beginning of my third year of law school, I applied for a full-time position with the office. And they put me through a lengthy set of interviews, but I suppose I must have impressed them, because despite the fact that they had literally hundreds of applicants, I was the first law student they hired that year for a full-time position. And I was very fortunate that the district attorney at the time, Dennis Dillon, was a very progressive, forward-thinking, self-confident district attorney who based his hiring decision on my abilities rather than my disability. I mean, Dennis Dillon seemed to know that when I went into court, the jury was not going to base its verdict on my inability to walk, but rather on my skill and competence as an attorney. And thanks to the training and guidance I received at the office, I became a very competent attorney. Excuse me. So I was able to complete law school during the standard 3-year time period. And I passed the very difficult New York State bar exam the first time that I took it. And I began my work at the district attorney's office by participating in a very intensive 4-week training program where they taught us all aspects of trial techniques from a prosecutor's perspective. And I was so proud to go to court my first day, only to find I couldn't fit through the swinging doorways in the courtroom to get to the prosecutor's table. Are you kidding me? I mean, I tried to anticipate what challenges and obstacles I would face in my new career. Fitting through the doorways to get into the courtroom was not one I thought was going to be a problem. This was again well before the Americans with Disabilities Act. My first assignment was to our traffic court bureau, which was located on the second floor of a neighboring building. And I was promoted after just 3 days in traffic court because the elevator was broken and no one knew when it would be fixed. That's how I got my first promotion. Probably the only time my disabilities ever worked in my favor. Well, when I was in district court, I worked really hard to become a proficient assistant district attorney. And I started doing a lot of litigation. And not long after I first did some litigation, I was approached by a defense attorney who told me that he overheard some of the prisoners talking about me in the pens behind the courtroom. Now, I never liked hearing that the prisoners were talking. But apparently they were saying that I was a really tough ADA, and they hoped they didn't get the guy in the wheelchair. So I worked hard to do a lot of litigation in district court, and I was actually promoted to our county court trial bureau before most of the ADAs I started with. And when I was in county court, the number of trials, pretrial hearings, and grand jury presentations that I did each year were consistently among the highest in my bureau. Now, on May 19th, 1997, I went down to Washington, D.C., where I was admitted to practice law before the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. And as I sat in the courtroom before all 9 Supreme Court justices, I was struck by the irony that the next day, May 20th, I had been asked to be one of the speakers at the 50th anniversary celebration of the Rusk Institute in New York City. Now, the Rusk Institute was the rehab facility in which I had been a patient 26 years earlier. That was the facility in which the medical personnel seemed to think the best I would ever be able to do would be to sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. So I was really looking forward to speaking at Rusk. Well, I was looking forward to it because I wanted to tell them, as I wanted to tell you now, that it's so important not to set limited expectations for people. Because your expectations can have a profound effect on what others will eventually accomplish. Because people's performance often rises and falls based upon what others think and expect of them. Now, I was very fortunate that my family always kept high expectations for me. And I believe that helped me accomplish far more than whatever anybody thought would be possible. Now, keeping your expectations for others also applies to keeping high expectations for yourself. What's important is you believe in yourself, and that you believe you can accomplish whatever goals you set for yourself. That you don't listen to the naysayers, that you don't listen to people that tell you something is just too difficult. What's important is not what other people think, but it's what you think about yourself. And that's why I love this slide of the pussycat looking in the mirror and seeing himself as a lion. That's how you need to think about yourself. You need to believe that you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. And I think that's helped me achieve far more than most people thought would ever be possible. Well, I worked for more than 40 years as an assistant district attorney, and I was promoted a number of times. In fact, I actually became one of the deputy bureau chiefs of the county court trial bureau, where I was helped supervise more than 25 other assistant district attorneys. Now, when you leave the district attorney's office, you go through what they call an exit interview, where you tell somebody in personnel what you enjoyed most about the job and what you thought could be improved upon it. And I'm very proud to say that on a number of occasions, I was told that some of my fellow assistant district attorneys said the best part of their job was meeting, getting to know, and working with me. Now, I tell you that not to boast or brag. I'm telling you that because I know what they were referring to was meeting, working with, on a daily basis, someone with a significant disability. Because unless somebody had a close relative with a disability, most people never came in contact with someone on a daily basis with a disability. And for many, it was a revelation to them, what it was like. I mean, they learned, for one, we're no different than anybody else. We have the same needs, wants, and desires as everybody. But I suppose also most importantly to them was it didn't mean any additional work for them. They found that not only was I a hard worker, I was often more productive than most of the people in the office, which was one of the reasons why I was promoted a number of times. And one of the reasons why I wanted to mention that today is apparently there are some people in the administration that have a negative view of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think they don't fully understand the benefits of it. How it not only helps and benefits the individual person that may be hired at a job or accepted into a school, but it helps those around them as well. It's a big benefit to society in general. And I just told you, many of my colleagues said one of the best parts of their job was working with me. And in fact, just to further the point, 2 years ago, the Nassau County District Attorney, who's now Ann Donnelly, decided to name an award after me, the Kenneth J. Kunken Award. It's given out on an annual basis. It's the only annual award the District Attorney's Office gives. And they gave it to recognize each year the outstanding Assistant District Attorney who best exemplifies the work ethic, the devotion and loyalty to the office, and the beneficial effect the person has on his or her colleagues as well as the guy in the wheelchair. So this next slide shows a picture. Ann Donnelly's the current district attorney. She's on the right. Jennifer Contreras is the assistant district attorney who received that award this year. And what is particularly meaningful to me is I used to supervise Ann Donnelly. When she was a relatively new ADA, in fact, she even sat in my office and I was her supervisor. She's now the district attorney. And the person that got the award this year, Jennifer Contreras, was another assistant that I used to supervise. And it was particularly meaningful to me that Ann Donnelly started this award because she saw the effect that having me in the office had on the other assistants. And she thought that it was such a beneficial effect. She began this award that's now going to be continued annually. So I told you a bit about my educational background and a bit about my work history. But now I want to share to you a portion of my private life. And I'd like to begin by taking you back to when I was first injured. You know, when I was 20, it just felt too soon to give up on life. I believed that there was still a lot that I could do, and my family encouraged me to get out and continue to participate in society, meet people, and do things. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I went back to Cornell. I wanted to pick up my life exactly where it was on the day I was injured. I didn't want my injury to prevent me from doing anything I would have been doing had I not been injured. So, as you can see, when I went back to Cornell, one of the first things I did was I went to a Cornell football game. I might add that one of the reasons why I went there and not other places was very few of the facilities were accessible to me. Ironically, the one place I could go was to the football stadium. But I did my best to try and participate in all the activities I would have done had I not been injured. And one of those activities was dating. I mean, like many men, I wanted to have a satisfying relationship with the perfect woman. And it took me a while to find that perfect woman for me. My name is Anna, she's sitting just to my left. Anna's the most incredible woman I've ever met. And I might add that, as you might expect, dating when you're a quadriplegic and trying to impress a woman when you're almost totally paralyzed poses its own unique set of challenges. But I was very fortunate to have Anna come into my life. And the way I met Anna, just so you know, is I was actually looking for another personal care attendant to help me on the weekends. And the way I used to find my aides was I would put an ad in the newspaper. And someone had recommended that I put an ad in the Polish Daily News, which was published here in New York City, because a lot of people used that newspaper to look for jobs. And I put an ad in the paper, and in the past, I've had a number of females answer the ad as well. And a female could do the job as well, I found, but one of the problems is they need to be big enough to lift me, because part of the responsibilities is to be able to lift me from the bed to the wheelchair. And I found that in order for a female to do it, just like a male, of course, is they need to be tall enough to reach over the back of this wheelchair to be able to lift me up. So I knew that the female needed to be at least 5'6" to be able to do that. And most of the females that would answer my ad were between 5'2" and 5'4". So whenever a female answered my ad, I would immediately ask on the phone, explain to them, I need to know how tall they were, because they wouldn't be able to reach over the wheelchair to lift me if they weren't at least 5'6" tall. So when Anna called, I asked Anna how tall she was, and she immediately responded, 184 centimeters. Now, fortunately, I was good with numbers, and in my head, I'm thinking 2.54 centimeters in an inch. You divide that into 184, and it's almost 6'1". So I knew I had to meet Anna, and Anna, despite the fact that she had never done this job before or anything like it, she came for an interview and absolutely blew me away. I mean, she was incredible. From day one, she was a very fast learner, quickly learned how to take care of me, and quickly became the best caregiver that I ever had. And the more I got to know Anna, the more our relationship turned first into a very close friendship, and then it evolved into a romantic relationship. Now, I must say that while I was looking forward to a romantic relationship, I had believed that I should never or could never have a romantic relationship that would last for any length of time. I was not looking for a permanent relationship. I just didn't think it would be fair to the woman because of my limitations. And I expressed that not only to Anna, but to my family, just so they knew what I was thinking. And my Aunt Betty convinced me otherwise. Betty said there was no reason why I couldn't get a long-term relationship. In fact, there's no reason why I couldn't eventually get married. Because Betty felt that someday I would meet the right woman, that she would fall in love with me, and that it wasn't up to me to make the decision for the woman, it would be her decision. So, the more I got to know Anna, I was convinced she was the right person. And I guess what they say about opposites attract certainly held true for us, because Anna and I are different in so many ways. I mean, for one, Anna was 19 years younger than I am. Anna was born and raised in Poland, while I've spent almost my entire life on Long Island. Anna is Catholic, and I am Jewish. Anna's over 6 feet tall, and I'm just under 5'8". Anna's a vegetarian, and I love to eat meat. And Anna's in exceptional physical condition, works out for more than an hour and a half every day, and I'm almost totally paralyzed. And yet it just seemed like a match made in heaven. There was a certain magic, a certain chemistry between us that you just can't put into words. And on June 14th, 2003, Anna and I were married. And boy, on that day, I didn't think my life could get any better. Well, when Anna and I first talked about getting married, Anna told me that she wanted to have my baby. Not just a baby, my baby. She said she wanted to see a little pumpkin running around on her. Now this really seemed impossible. At the time, I had been paralyzed for more than 30 years, and I was already in my 50s. Well, there is a saying in the military that I've always liked. The saying goes, the difficult we do at once, the impossible takes a little longer. Well, Anna and I were determined to make the impossible happen, and we wanted to do it sooner rather than later. So we looked into various options, including in vitro fertilization. And we're very excited to learn it still may be possible for someone in my condition to father a child. So we decided to pursue it. And soon Anna's dream of having my baby not just became my dream, it became our quest. So we found a urologist who specialized in male fertility. And shortly after our wedding, I underwent my part of the in vitro procedure. Now, unfortunately, it was not successful, but we were determined to make it work. I then went through a second procedure and a third procedure, but both of them were not successful either. But you know, rather than getting discouraged and depressed, Anna and I were actually getting more excited with each attempt. We were absolutely convinced together we were going to make this work. And with each procedure, we felt we were getting that much closer to reaching our goal. And finally, on my fourth procedure, my procedure was successful. And now it was Anna's turn. Anna had to go through a lengthy process of hormone treatments, both by mouth and by injection. And she had to travel to New York City every day, which was about an hour away from her home, to be examined, monitored, and have blood drawn. And she did all this while she was taking care of me as well. And as luck would have it, Anna's test results were not going well. In fact, Anna was actually told one day that if her hormone levels don't improve by the next day, they were going to have to stop the whole process. Who would believe we may not be able to have our own biological child because of fertility problems with my wife and not with me? I mean, who would possibly guess that could be, happening? Well, Anna was convinced that her procedure would be successful, and she was determined to make it so. In fact, Anna was so optimistic, she even painted our second bedroom during this time, so that it would be ready for when the baby arrived. Well, Anna's positive attitude paid off, and when the time came, the doctor was able to withdraw some well-developed eggs. But we still knew that there was no guarantee of a successful in vitro pregnancy. Because many of the women Anna met at the fertility clinic had gone through these procedures many times without getting pregnant. Well, God was surely smiling on us, because Anna became pregnant on the first attempt. And you know, after going through this whole process, Honor and I are even more convinced that nothing is impossible. We believe we can tackle whatever challenges life puts in our way. We believe that together we can accomplish anything we set our minds to. And it's amazing what you can accomplish through hard work, determination, perseverance, and the right attitude. And it's that last trait, the right attitude, that may be the most important one of all. Maintaining a positive attitude will help you in virtually everything you choose to do in life. I cannot emphasize that enough. Excuse me, just a drink. So that brings me to my favorite day. On January 24th, 2003, 2005. January 24th, 2005, I was present in the delivery room. Picture this. I was present in the delivery room when my wife Anna gave birth to triplets. We have three incredible, beautiful boys, Joey, Jimmy, and Timmy. And I cannot begin to tell you how much we love them. On June 16th, 2006, to coincide with Father's Day weekend, the Long Island newspaper Newsday featured a picture of me with my three boys on its cover. And I can tell you without hesitation, there are no accomplishments that I am more proud of than being a good husband and a good father. I mean, these boys bring a whole new meaning to my life. I could not be happier or more proud. And actually, the day before this article appeared, 7 different local television stations did stories about me, my family, and the doctor's procedure that helped me become a father. So I thought I'd show you just one of those television stories now.
This Father's Day, a Long Island family will not only celebrate Dad, they'll also celebrate a medical miracle. CBS 2's Reed Lamberty has the second story. The pitter-patter of feet racing across the living room floor. And the innocence of hide-and-go-seek in the backyard are sights and sounds Ken Kunken never imagined.
It's an incredible feeling, and something in my wildest dreams I never envisioned could happen.
Ken was paralyzed 35 years ago during a college football game. The 55-year-old finished college and law school, married his wife Anna 3 years ago, and through advanced sperm retrieval, fathered 3 boys, Timmy, Joey, and James.
We're doing approximately 60 of these a year right now, not the exact same situation, but testicular sperm retrieval.
A medical miracle these 3 boys may not be, but don't tell that to their parents, especially Ken, who after suffering his crippling injury, accepted the fact he would never father children.
It's just wonderful every day waking up to these boys and going to bed looking at these boys is the best feeling in the world.
We can do many things. Nobody will even think it's possible.
The birth of their sons proved that the impossible is achievable. And the man who before his accident was a picture of strength and youth, spending his days running on a football field, now watches his sons do the same in the backyard. And he would have it no other way. In Rockville Center, Reed Lamberty, CBS 2 News.
Look at that. What a great shot and a great Father's Day for them. And John Belaris is here. You're going to be so.
You know, I've been very fortunate. You know, Rabbi, when I think back to the terribly depressing time and days when I was first hurt and in the hospital, one of the things that comes to mind is that I was visited by many members of the clergy back then, from all denominations, all different religions. And every one of those visits went pretty much the same way. a member of the clergy would come into my room and ask me how I was doing. And I would respond immediately, terrible. And I would ask, can you tell me why I was injured? I mean, I felt, here I'd been what I thought was a good person, 20 years old, leading a good life. I thought maybe a member of the clergy could tell me the reason why I was injured. And it seemed like everyone responded the same way. They would say things like, well, no one knows the ways of God, or God works in mysterious ways. But everything has a reason for it. And everyone would end their conversation by saying, but I'm sure God has a plan for you. And when I was 20, lying in that hospital bed, I found very little comfort in those words. But you know, sitting here today and thinking about my life and thinking about those words, that if God's plan was that I was to become so disabled and so in need of assistance that I would be so desperate I would put an ad in a Polish newspaper that Anna would happen to be here in the States trying to improve her English speaking skills, would see the ad, and despite never having done this work before, would respond. That I fortunately had the good sense to hire her. And that our relationship would develop from, you know, caregiver to best friends to a romantic relationship to where we would get married and become the parents of 3 wonderful, wonderful, wonderful sons. Well, I guess it was a pretty good plan. You know, I told you at the beginning of my talk that when I was 20, I dreamed of leading a useful, productive, rewarding, and happy life. And sitting here today and thinking about the happy life that I've been able to lead, I realized that despite spending the last 54 years needing to use a wheelchair, I am living my dream. I've been so fortunate to have Anna in my life and these 3 boys. You can see these boys now wearing their college t-shirts. They're now 20 years old, sophomores in 3 different colleges in upstate New York. Timmy is the young man on the right, who's now pursuing a dual major at the SI Newhouse School of Communications and the Maxwell School of Public Affairs at Syracuse University. Jimmy is behind me in the middle, and he's studying renewable energy at the State University of New York at Morrisville. And Joey is on the left. He is studying mechanical engineering at my alma mater, Cornell University. In fact, I graduated from Cornell Engineering in May of 1973. In August 2023, 50 years later, Joey enrolled as a freshman there. I mean, how great is that? It's not a matter of being blessed with good luck. You have to make it happen. And while you cannot always control everything that happens to you, you can control how you react to it. I believe that we all possess a certain innate ability that helps us to function and handle difficult situations. And I believe we also possess an inner strength that enables us to rise to the occasion and and tackle what may seem like insurmountable odds. And it's how that inner strength is used that will make the difference between someone who is good and someone who is great. How that inner strength is used will make the difference between someone who is satisfied with the status quo and someone who is constantly setting new goals and reaching new heights. And it's how that inner strength is used that will make the difference between someone who lets the unpredictability of life control him or her and someone who takes control over his or her life. So if I leave you with a message today, I would like it to be, don't settle for less than the best. Try to improve your knowledge, your skills, and your performance. Get the best education possible and never stop learning. Don't be satisfied with the status quo. Strive to make the impossible possible. Just because something has not been done before doesn't mean you cannot do it now. You have to challenge yourself. Get involved and stay involved in as many challenging activities as you can. And it's so important to participate. Don't just sit back waiting for something to happen. Good things come to you when you work for them. And it's only when you're actively involved that you have control over the outcome. And while I certainly don't advocate being reckless, I do suggest there are times when you need to take chances, to try new things, to experiment. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid to try something just because it's difficult. In fact, sometimes choose to do something not because it's easy, but rather just because it is hard. And don't waste your time worried about things you cannot control. Instead, appreciate what you have and what's taken place around you, and be proud of yourself. Be proud of who you are, what you do, and what you have accomplished. And make your family, your friends, and your community proud of you as well. And find time to help others. Years from now, be able to say, you did everything you possibly could to make not only your lives better, but the lives of those around you better as well. And remember the hopes and dreams of your youth and work hard to make them come true. Keep in mind that our greatest dreamers have become our greatest achievers. 6 months after my spinal cord injury, I was invited to testify before a United States Senate Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And the words in that inscription have always been very meaningful to me. The inscription was a quotation originally attributed to George Bernard Shaw. And I absolutely love what these words say. The inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." So I say to you all today, you need to recognize and realize that each of you has the power and the ability to make not only your dreams come true, but the dreams of so many others as well. So my parting message is, make it happen. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken, for the wonderful presentation. I think many of you have heard me say before, saying it's all part of God's plan to a grieving family is the last thing you should be saying. So I don't think I would have said that to you. And I know I've given a sermon or two on suffering doesn't bring meaning, but how we encounter our suffering is what brings meaning. And I think Ken's story And Anna's story as well is proof of how we encounter what's going on in our lives is what brings us meaning and purpose. I think we have some time for a few questions.
Absolutely.
So, any questions?
Yes.
Hi, so, I just wanted to say something about vocational rehabilitationists. Voc rehab, person is how I went to school, for the first time as an adult, to college, and, I eventually became an occupational therapist. So I'm watching as things progress. I'm like, yeah, remember that in the old books? You know, that's how we do that now. And but that whole connection and circle, you know, is so important. Having the right rehab counselor is so
Absolutely.
important.
And they made a big difference for me and my life and what I was able to do. And I actually had a vocational counselor at the Rusk Institute who was the one person who was really supporting my desire to go back to school, and in fact to go back to Cornell. And she encouraged me to do that and was real helpful in getting me back there. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand that I don't have enormous respect, right, for people in the voc rehab field. I absolutely do. But, you know, many of my fellow patients at Rusk had been injured for many years when I met them and did not seem to be doing anything with their lives. And I thought one of the reasons was because they weren't encouraged to do it. Everybody seemed to have such limited expectations for them and for me that they weren't encouraged to do more. And nobody told them, you can do these things. You know, I felt horrible when Christopher Reeve was injured. I mean, that really shook me. But boy, was he an incredible role model for so many people. And he brought such awareness to disability in general, but particularly to spinal cord injuries. Now, Christopher Reeve was hurt 25 years after I was. When I was injured, I didn't know of anybody in my condition who was out in public and doing things with their life and working at a job. Now, they may have been there, but I didn't know about them, you know? And of course, before the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was so difficult for anybody in my condition to go out in public and get around. That's one of the reasons why you probably didn't see people in wheelchairs out there then. So it makes such a difference now to have people out there where now the general public comes in contact with people with disabilities, and it helps change people's attitudes. People see that we're not different than anybody else, that we can work or go to school or to basically do everything else somebody who does not have a disability can do. And it makes a huge difference. And that's just so important. And fortunately, the rehab professionals are very helpful in getting people out there. And I think that's great. Yes.
I have a very, actually, it's more, how, when you went back to Cornell, can you see, what are the differences? Because I'm sure there are, that you can get around the campus.
You know, my wife and I were actually back there in October, not only visiting my son, but now I'm a member of the Cornell University Council. So we went back there in October, and all the buildings now have ramps and or elevators. There's accessible public transportation. They have buses running through campus that are wheelchair accessible, that help people with disabilities get around. They have a very active disabled students office there now, helping people with disabilities on campus. And it's like night and day. It's like a different school. It is such a pleasure to see. And Cornell is actually active in doing work to help people with, you know, disabilities.
They don't believe that, right?
Yeah, they're one of just so wonderful to see. What a difference. Yeah.
So I am curious, during my tenure, I was a retired special education teacher. And so I worked primarily in my career under IDEA 94-122. How did you, when you went back to school, how were the instructors and the accommodations? You weren't able to sit and take an essay test. You weren't able to do those same things that they were expecting of other students. And I'm very curious on how you handled getting the accommodations that you needed to be able to demonstrate your knowledge in those assessment project situations.
That's a good question, and it was really, really difficult. But as it turned out, I had gotten a lot of publicity while I was there. And as a result, I mean, everybody pretty much knew who I was. And there were some professors that I took that took a special interest in me and wanted me to succeed. And the way I took exams was I would go into a special room just with the professor oftentimes. And I would take my test orally with the professor, which was very intimidating.
That's impressive as an engineer.
You know, and I'll tell you, the first exam that I took when I went back was in probability. Well, of course, that I thought I actually knew. So, you know, I was looking forward to it. And my professor was first by name Professor Weiss. And I went into his study with him. And he stood right by the blackboard that he had in his office, chalk in hand, right by the blackboard, and gave me a test of 5 questions. They put it on my lap, and he's standing by the blackboard, ready to do the writing as I did to him. And I looked at the test, and I read question number 1, and I went blank. And I said, let me go to question number 2, and I was blank. And he's standing there the whole time, his hand in the air, chalk in his hand. And I read question number 3, question number 5, and I figured, if I fail this test, there's no way I'm going to succeed at Cornell. This would be horrible. And I thought it was the one course I actually knew what was going on. And suddenly, it was like a light bulb went on in my head. And suddenly, I knew it. And I started dictating, and he was racing to keep up with me to do the writing. And I was so aggravated because I made some silly errors. I got an 85, which, you know, in engineering too, you know, most tests were graded on a curve, so it was actually a good grade, so I didn't do better, and I ended up doing well. Now, you know, some professors took a special interest, you know, and may have given me, you know, I'd go in a special room with somebody to do the writing for me. And as I say, my psych professor took such a special interest in me. He gave me an independent study, you know, special course to do with him alone, and later encouraged me to change my career goal and pursue counseling. But I might add that when I decided that I wanted to go to law school, at that time, again, well before the Americans with Disabilities Act, one of the things I had to do was take the law course. They did not give me any additional time to take it, right? So it was a multiple choice test. They put me in a room with somebody they assigned to do the writing. And time was a big factor. And the person doing the writing for me took an interest in the test, and he's trying to look over my shoulder and read, which was so distracting. And I would read and I would dictate. All right, question number 1, the answer is B. And he'd go, is that B or D? B is in boy. And I'd look to see, and time was a factor. They didn't give me any additional time to take it. I thought that was really unfair. But fortunately, I still did well. And when I took the bar exam, what they said was they wouldn't give me additional time on the end of the exam, but they would allow me to start earlier in the day than the other people take it. Now, they give you 2 extra days to take the exam. I didn't have that. So in order for me to get to the exam by 9 in the morning, I had to start getting up by 5:30 in the morning to get there by 9. To get there earlier than that was real tough, and to have the stamina to sit through those 2-day exams was really, really difficult. As they say now, they let you do it in 2 additional days, but they didn't let me do that at that time. But I was fortunate that I passed.
So how do you feel about, accommodations that are now made for students? What's your perception on what's going on?
My perception is it's a whole different world and it's great. It's great. It benefits everyone. And there's no reason in most careers why you're under such a time limitation that you have to do it in a certain amount of time. And I might add that, just to give you a story about Cornell, I was very grateful for them. I thought they, had gone out of their way to allow me to come back, and they converted a dorm room, a lounge in a dorm to be my dorm room. But the one request I made is, could they install a ramp by the building? So I wouldn't have to go up those 10 steps every day, up and down those 10 steps, usually more than once a day. And they wanted to be nice and they wanted to be helpful, but they were concerned. They said, if we were to put in a ramp there, we would have to remove 2 bushes. And they were concerned that students might protest if they removed the bushes. Now, quite frankly, students were protesting everything. I mean, this was during the Vietnam War. There were a lot of protests, so I understood. And what happened was, at the beginning of my 2nd semester there, we had a fire drill. Now, of course, when you have a fire drill, everyone must evacuate the building. And the next day, one of the school administrators approached me and asked how I managed during the drill. And I was very honest with him. I told him that I was able to get out by having my aide bounce me down the 10 steps. But I really felt bad because I know I slowed up the other students who were exiting. Wouldn't you know, within 2 weeks they installed a ramp. And it was very clear to me that ramp was not for my benefit, but for the convenience of the other students. And that was fine with me. And by the way, not one student protested about me going into the ramp. In fact, many preferred using the ramp to walk up and down the steps. Yes.
I'm assuming that there's a lot more technology today that makes it easy for you to function. Could you tell us something about that? And also, I know Cornell has a lot of ice and snow. How did you manage that?
That was brutal. It was brutal. And again, I couldn't use my electric wheelchair up there. It was real difficult. Ice, snow, a lot of rain. But I was determined to get to my classes and make it work. And I was kind of a bit of a crazy person as well. Just to give you an example, there was one day when we had a huge snowstorm, 2 feet of snow. One of the rare occasions where they canceled classes for a day. But as it turned out, it was also the same day as the Cornell-Harvard hockey game. And I wanted to go. And I called up some of my fraternity brothers, and they helped carry me in my wheelchair all the way up to Lynham Rink, the hockey rink, to see the hockey game. So we made it work. Wasn't always the easiest or the smartest thing, but I was fortunate. My fraternity brothers, football teammates, people wanted to help, but it was difficult. But when you say advancements in technology, as they said, there were no laptop computers back then. What a difference that makes, Now, my joystick, I've got actually a Bluetooth connected to it, where I can work the computer by moving my joystick. back then, it could take me, as I said, a number of minutes just to turn a page in my book. But having to go to the library and get books and turn pages and do assignments was really difficult. And I was fortunate that I had a good memory, and I relied a lot on my memory. In fact, in the DA's office, I used to do my summations without notes. You know, I would do like hour-long summations without anything in front of me. Most of my fellow ADAs had it all written out in front of them. And when they would do their examinations, whether it be direct or cross, they would have every question written down. And I was relying on my memory, which was a lot of pressure, because I never knew if one day it may fail me, and here I'd be on an important case and not do justice to it. So, but I was fortunate that it worked out. But yeah, advancements they have now with computers make a huge difference. Huge difference. Jay?
Can you tell us about your book? Subtle.
Can't you go to the next slide?
Very subtle, Jay. The one that just happens to be outside the door.
And this slide happens to be the cover of my book. I wrote a book, I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken story. And if you remember from my talk, I got the title from that quote that Senator Kennedy sent to me. Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream of things that never were, and say, why not? I like that so much, I use that as the title to my book. I dream of things that never were. And what happened was, when I was in the rehab facility, one of my Aunt Lorraine's friend by the name of Albert Meglin came to visit me in the facility. And Al had done some writing on his own, not a lot, but some. And he thought it would be good therapy for me to be able to verbalize what I was going through, even when I was depressed, and talk about it. But also, he said, nobody really knows what it's like going through rehabilitation, right? Particularly with a spinal cord injury. And he thought it would be very informative if I could write it down and people would be able to learn more about it. So he would come and he had a kind of modified shorthand. And we would sit there, and I don't know, how do you write a book? I mean, you know, remember, I was in engineering, we can't write. We were good with numbers, but English, So he would come and he'd say, well, why don't you tell me what happened today, and then we'll go back and talk about the injury and what happened. And that's how we did it for a number of times. He would come one day, and I remember the first day he came was 23 weeks to the day that I was injured. Because that's how I started dictating, was 23 weeks to the day that I got, you know, and I would tell him about what it was like that day, and then go back and talk about my injury. And we did that a number of times, and then I got out of the rehab facility. I was coming home on weekends, and he would visit me there. I was staying at my Aunt Lorraine's at the time, and I dictate some more. And then I went to college, and I stopped working with Al Meglin. But every so often, you know, months would pass by, and I'd have somebody set me up by the typewriter, and I would try and type very slowly something about my life. And, you know, on a good day, I could do a page, maybe get to two before my arm would totally fatigue. And I'd start and stop and leave the book for months at a time and then pick it up again. And then I was surprised after my boys were born, well, even before my boys were born, people started encouraging me to do motivational speaking. And it kind of surprised me. I was like, what do I have to talk about? I mean, I didn't think I had done anything special. And they were like, you did, you know, and they encouraged me to speak. And, you know, I was a bit reluctant. But then when the boys were born, I remember, you know, first when triplets are born, they're always born prematurely. You know, boys are fortunately very healthy, but they're originally in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. And I remember visiting them in the NICU, the 3 boys, and I remember sitting by the incubators and looking at them, and it was like, whoa, this is big. This needs to be told. And Anna, when she had a free moment, which was difficult, raising 3 baby triplets, had to take care of me. But when we had some free time, we would sit by her laptop computer, and I would dictate to Anna, right? And that's how we wrote the book.
Which was difficult because back then I didn't know how to write in English.
And, I would try and dictate, I would say something like, well, on such and such a day, I went to the store. And she would write, I went to a store. I said, no, not a store, the store. And to her, it sounded identical. And then, but of course, then she would push me. You can't just say you went to the store. Why did you go to the store? How did you get to the store? What were you thinking when you went to the store?
Excuse me, it's different when somebody like Ken cannot move and go to the store to shopping, okay? For you, it's different. This is something that you have to be told,
So,
okay? I'm sorry.
for me, trying to not just write factually what happened, but to talk about my feelings was very difficult. So that was difficult to get on paper. And then, once we wrote it, we went to a writing conference in the city where we were told there were a lot of literary agents there, and you need to get a literary agent to get your book published, and they're swamped, and it's very difficult to get a book published. And at the end of this, I guess, 3-day seminar that we went to, you had the opportunity to have what they call the pitch fest, where they give you like 2 minutes with each agent to pitch your book. And I went there and I wasn't getting too big a reception, and at least one person said, your story is the triplets, you should just write about them. And I'm saying, I agree, the triplets are the best part of my story, but if you don't talk about what went into everything that led up to the birth of the triplets, I think you're missing out on a lot. And we couldn't find a publisher. And I have a good friend named Russ Cannon, who's a judge down in Washington, and he wrote some books, and he said, why don't we give Russ my book proposal, he'll show it to his publisher, which he did, and his publisher was a company named 12 Tables Press. The head of it's a person by the name of Steve Eric, who's a lawyer, and he only published books concerning lawyers and legal issues. And I said to Steve Eric, my book's not really a legal book. He said, that's all right, you're an ADA, you're a lawyer. And he read the proposal and he liked it. And he agreed to publish my book. So my book is published by 12 Tables Press. It's also out on Kindle. And recently, we put it out as an audio book as well, where I dictated the audio book, which is just under 16 hours. And in fact, my son Timmy did the recording, he controlled the recording. So that's out on audiobook now as well. So we're very excited that the book is out there. It's gotten some very nice comments, some very good Kirkus Review, which is the company that reviews a lot of books. And we actually brought some here to sell it. Okay, yes.
It was so nice talking to you before, and some of your background, of course, is so interesting. But when you first went back to Cornell, you had AIDS. Was there somebody, or did you have to coordinate? Because I'm thinking about, all the things that went into your day, your classes, Cornell itself. Was there somebody who coordinated or helped you, or it was all?
It was me.
It was you.
It was me, and I mean, I didn't know how to do any of this. I mean, how do you find an aide?
Yeah.
to help you, and then you gotta train the aide. And how do you arrange to get to class? I mean, I couldn't use the electric wheelchair. And it, you know, what do you do when the weather is bad? And
Which it is often.
how are you gonna do your homework assignments when you can't write?
Right.
So, trial and error, and I look back at it and I still can't believe we did it.
Did you have somebody take notes for you? I mean,
You know, what I eventually learned and decided to do was I eventually gave carbon paper to somebody else in the class at a pad, and I got copies of their notes. You know, somebody had suggested, well, why don't you just tape record it? Well, sitting through an engineering lecture is brutal. To do it more than once. So that would have been real tough. So I thought, you know, maybe if I gave carbon paper or something. And some of the people I gave it to took good notes, some not so much. But that's the way I did it for my master's programs and for law school as well.
Can I comment something?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so, this is the school part. When I came to Ken's life, that was 1999. You know, normally, indeed, you would have somebody to coordinate and help that person who is on wheelchair and totally paralyzed, right? Ken was the one to do it, everything from the A to Z, from hiring the aides and, you know, or coordinating somebody who would teach that new aide how to do the job, okay? And, you know, for example, okay, I'm coming there, let's say I'm alone already with Ken, and I don't know what it's where, okay? There are a few closets, there are some drawers, some things like that. He knows where everything is, okay? Now his aide has to tell him, and me included, of course, where everything is, so if somebody else is coming, instead of me, because something happened to me, he knows where that person's supposed to find things to help him, okay? He knew everything. He could visualize the whole closet, what was where, okay? He would say, you know, there is this and that we were looking for. It's on the left side in this closet on the third, you know, shelf, or where is the drawer, and things like that. He knew, he had to know. Now you're sleeping, Ken, because you rely on me too much. You kind of don't care. So right now, if somebody else would come, I think that you would be totally lost, right?
But you know, when, in my defense, but you know, as I indicated, I found that I got very good response to my ads by putting ads in the Polish paper. But many people responding didn't speak English very well. And it was really difficult, you know, and I asked people to get me my shirt, shoot, sheet, shirt. I mean, you weren't sure what I'm talking about. And I started learning Polish now. I'm not very good at it, but I learned, you know, a number of words. I mean, I probably know now more than 400 words. Leva meaning go left, or prava, right, or overjaj, you know, be careful, or, you know, I mean, different ways. And a lot of times I would try and learn enough words in Polish to be able to communicate with some of my Polish aides. But it was challenging.
Yeah, but he was the one to organize everything.
And there was no office at that point in the 70s in Cornell, because
No disabled students
No, I
office
don't
there.
remember that.
No disabled students.
No.
I mean, it was rare. It was rare, you know, you didn't see somebody in a wheelchair
No.
up there. And then later there was one student that was injured while I was up there, named Mark Clement, who broke his back trace sliding. And he went back there, but I mean, he zipped around in his manual wheelchair, and he could do everything himself. So he, you know, didn't need the assistance that I needed. But, you know, other than the two of us, you didn't see somebody in a wheelchair up there for good reason. I mean, it was crazy being up there, you know. But
If I say so, back in October last year when we went there, we had a lecture. You know, we kind of like set up something in the archives to do the lecture. Somebody told us what's in their archives in Cornell. But anyway, we went there, and there's this one guy on wheelchair. I think he had some kind of, I don't know, he was born this way, but he was in the same kind of wheelchair Kenny's on. And he came to meet Maverick, he said, because apparently he was very active. He was there doing PhD in math. And he said that he heard so much about Ken and the history of, let's say, him being there. He just started this process of making stuff accessible, little by little, over years, even before ADA was established. So it was funny, he's coming down looking with the big eyes on Ken and said, Maverick, I didn't know how, yeah, I just wanted to meet you. Because he was the first, and thanks to you, I can do things here.
You know, when I went to Columbia, because I had that success of getting a ramp finally put in at Cornell, I decided to be a little bold, and in order for me to get to class, there was 2 curves that I had to cross. So I took it upon myself to write to the city to see if they would put in curb cuts there. And to my amazement, they did it. I mean, this is again, well before the Americans with Disabilities Act. I convinced New York City to put in 2 curb cuts. Can you imagine what that's like to do that? So, having done that, when I moved to Rockville Center, Long Island, I decided I wanted to make the village more accessible to me. So I contacted people in the village, and I wrote letters, and I spoke to people, and I was persistent. And I convinced them to put in 53 curb cuts throughout the village of Rockville Center to make it accessible. Again, this was well before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, you know, if each person plays their part when you say you have a disability, to make it a little easier for the next person, that goes a long way. And hopefully, as I said, you know, when I was injured, I didn't know of any role models that were doing some of these things. I was hoping that maybe I could be one of